We're going to start our second seminar of the day, and this one is on the Vietnam War POW experience. We have three pilots with us today, each with an interesting story. Two of the stories are similar. The third story is related but quite different. So I'll start out with our two, what should I say, fighter-bomber pilots? Attack pilots. We've got Arv Chauncey, who was a U.S. Navy pilot, flying an A4E, and Dave Everson, who was in the Air Force, flying an F-105F. So Dave, why don't we start with you, and very briefly, why did you join the service? Why did you join the Air Force? You want to go through this part very fast. So.
I had already been in the Army, so I wasn't required to serve anymore. But I wanted to fly, and I wanted to fly fighters.
Okay. Arv Chauncey, why did you join the Navy?
Well, basically, I had the same answer. Ever since I was a little kid, I always wanted to fly. My dad spent 10 years in the Army Air Corps, and big influence on me, and so I just always wanted to fly, and that was my method to get there.
And your training was at?
Navy pilots all go through Pensacola, Florida for the flight training, and then on into Texas perhaps for advanced training, and then join your squadrons after that.
And Dave Everson, you started fairly early. Where was your training?
I was at a civilian base in Marietta, Florida for the first 6 months, and then I went to Bryan, Texas for jet training.
Okay. And
on to Phoenix, Arizona for F-86.
Okay. Arv Chauncey, just very briefly, you had, as a Navy pilot, you had an experience that very few people experience, comparatively very few people. What's it like landing on a carrier?
I'll put it this way, if you ever meet a Navy pilot that says he enjoys day and night carrier landings, the night part, he's either crazy or he's lying to you. Daytime, once you've been trained, is fun. It's just a great experience as long as airplane's operating properly and so forth. Nighttime, I don't care how many hours you have, it's still a very exciting experience to get through and get safely back aboard the ship at night.
Dave, you did quite a bit of time under your belt by the time you got your orders to Vietnam. What rank were you? Were you a major?
I made major about 6 weeks before I was shot down.
Okay, so you were a captain when you went to Vietnam.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And just very briefly, now you're going to Vietnam. This is your first combat. What's your feeling? What are you thinking about?
Well, scary. Now, I actually had 11 missions on me when I went to Vietnam. I flew my first combat missions in the fall of 1964, flying out of Iraq. And then in the summer of '65, I was stationed in the U.S., but was deployed to Japan. And I would sneak down there and get a few missions. So when I became a weasel, I already had 11 missions.
Okay. And Arv Chauncey, as a Navy pilot, what was your feeling in your first mission in Vietnam? And when did you arrive there?
Let's see, we got on the line in the Gulf of Tonkin in early '67, and first mission, scared. Going out, what we all talked about, cotton mouth. Your mouth feels so dry, it feels like you're stuffed full of cotton. But once you just get a few missions under your belt, then you get used to it. But that first one, obviously, a little anxiety and just downright scared until it's over with.
And what became a typical mission, the type of target, the type of things that you went through, and just a typical mission?
Well, for the Navy pilots, and I'm sure it was the same for the Air Force, the standard missions, I would say, were in effect a waste of time. We'd go up and bomb sites that had been bombed so many times that they looked like the moon. And then occasionally we'd get something that came out of Washington that we called an alpha strike, and that was something up in the Hanoi, Haiphong area, and that's when it really got exciting and you were going to really get shot at by all kinds of AAA and SAM. So one day it might just be a milk run, dropping bombs someplace where the ground already looked like the moon, and another time you're going downtown Hanoi or Haiphong and just have a real important target that they're shooting you, really shooting at you.
And Dave, what about for you? What was a typical mission?
Well, a typical mission for us, we were flying out of Thailand. We would have a flight of 4 taxis to the north end of the runway, and while we were arming, our tanker would take off to the north. And as soon as he went by, we taxied on and took off to the south. We make a big U-turn once we got joined up, and usually we wind up with the tanker, and then we refuel twice, put the target, come back and refuel again.
And the types of targets you were hitting?
Well, that was a weasel, so it was our job to find and destroy, or at least put down the sand sites and the lead laying radars.
And can you talk a little bit about the types of anti-aircraft fire that you encountered?
Well, there was a lot of 37 and 57, but we were scared of the 85 millimeter. And I was shot at once by SAMs, but by and large, the SAMs were pretty much inactive during the whole time I was there.
And Arn, what about for you? What kind of anti-aircraft fire did you encounter?
Yeah, same thing that Dave's flying into the same areas that I am, and I'm just, the difference is I'm coming off of a carrier, going back to a carrier out in the Gulf of Tonkin. But same thing, 37 millimeter on up to, a few times we actually had 100 millimeter stuff up near the Chinese border, and surface air missiles that were coming up, and you're dodging those and doing the best you could to survive.
Okay. Now, both of you had one especially fateful mission in Vietnam. And Arn, do you want to talk about the mission on which you were shot down? What was your mission that day, and what were the circumstances of your being shot down?
Okay, today's mission is it's my 57th combat mission that I'm going to start, and I'm a lieutenant commander, which is the same as a major in the Air Force or the Marine Corps or the Army. So I'm the flight leader of a flight of 6 A4s. There are 6 other A4s from our sister squadron on the carrier, and it's being flown by the squadron commanding officer. So he is the flight leader. So I've only got 5 fingers, but 6 airplanes, and I'm back here with 6, and we're going to proceed into the target. The target for this trip was a real important one. It was their MiG base up to the northwest of Hanoi. The name of the base was KEP, K-E-P. My roommate had flown that mission a few days before, and that night when I was planning my charts, he pointed to a spot on the map and he said, Arv, when you go over that spot right there, they're just going to shoot the hell out of you. And I remember just putting a little red circle around it and said, okay, and pressed on. Bottom line, when we got to that point, it's just like any good World War II documentary film you've seen. The sky just lit up with black puffs and a lot of AAA was going off, and best thing you can do is just keep flying straight ahead and keep going towards your target. We got into this heavy fire, and I heard something hit my airplane. It sounded kind of like popping a beer can open, pop, pop. And so I knew I'd had some shrapnel hit the plane. A couple of minutes later, my wingman, a young kid just out of flight training, his voice was about 10 decibels higher than normal. He came up and he said, Arv, you're on fire. So I got to make this short for you. But so bottom line, my airplane's on fire, and I call the flight leader and say, this is Eagle 1 and my wingman, we're trying to get back to the water. We're almost 65 miles in. If I can get back to the water, I know I can eject and get rescued. One other point for people who are pilots in the room, normally if you were flying over Texas in a jet airplane and it's on fire, and you know you're on fire, you're going to get the hell out right away, because it could blow up any time. If you're 65 miles over North Vietnam, I'm not going to get out. I'm going to try to make the water because I don't want to jump out over enemy territory. So, to make a long story short, I stayed with the airplane as long as I could. He kept telling me I was burning. I finally just decided I had to eject, pull the handle, ejected, and when I got home and read the report from my wingman, I had stayed with it to about 200 or 300 feet, so I didn't have long in the parachute. Made a safe landing, and then from there on, I won't go into that now, but because it was about an hour and a half before I was actually captured. But that was it. The airplane was on fire, tried to make it to the water. I just couldn't. Engine actually had quit, and I was gliding at the last part. Had to jump out.
And Dave, you also had one fateful mission. Can you talk about the circumstances of your being shot down?
Yes, this was the first mission on the steel plant. I knew it. And I was the first airplane in. As a weasel, we were supposed to...
Needs to stay.
As a weasel, we were supposed to try and put down the SAM sights and the gun lane radars. But I was going through the missile, fire a strike into the missile in the home on the radar. And I just got the missile off when I took a hit in the left wing with the 85. The shell did not explode, but it hit the main spar, and the left wing came off, and the airplane just kind of went under the ball right there in the sky. And for a long time, the G-forces were too great. I couldn't bail out. I was going 550. Yeah. You'd get a lot of G's when you go 550. When I finally bailed out, I was at 1,000 feet. My back seater bailed out after he saw my rocket exhaust coming in around his feet. And his parachute opened on the same instant his feet touched the ground. And he made a stand-up landing. And the local folks were very cranky. They captured me immediately. They were beating on me pretty good with rifle butts. I don't think any one of them intended to kill me. They just all wanted a piece of me.
And where did they keep you the first day or two, first couple of days?
Well, the very first thing, the Army came and hauled me away, stripped me down to my jockey shorts and my socks, tied my hands behind my back. I was bleeding pretty good from my head wounds. They wrapped a bandage around it for me. When it started getting dark, I was shot down at 3 in the afternoon. When it started getting dark, they ran me and my back seater round and round in circles on crushed rock. Pretty hard on bare feet. And I know it was in circles because I kept going past the same noises. And then they threw us in the back of a dump truck and started off to Hanoi. And it went all night. We got there about 3, 4, 5 in the morning. And the real interrogation started.
And Arn, what was your initial experience like on the ground?
Well, I was on the ground probably hour and a half, hour 45 before I got captured. Again, to make an hour and 45 minutes worth of, if you want to call it escape and evasion, I was just hiding out in brush. I saw people finally walking toward me off in the distance. I had my guys overhead strafe them. I don't know if they hit anybody or not, but eventually they came up the hill and I was captured. They stripped all my stuff off. I remember thinking, shifting from being a free man to a captive, and I'm thinking, okay, what have I been trained to do? And the only thing we flew with was a little money if you had to divert someplace so you could buy a beer and a hamburger, and your Geneva Convention card with your name, rank, serial number, date of birth, and so forth on it. And I remember in survival school they'd said, okay, give them your Geneva Convention card so they can put you in the system. So this group of guys were standing around me yelling and screaming and cutting my flight gear off and so forth. And I remember slipping my hand in my pocket and I thought, I'll hand my Geneva Convention card to the oldest, most mature looking person in the crowd here. So I handed it to this guy he took this laminated card and threw it over his shoulder. So it was my first clue that things were not going to be like Warner Springs and San Diego in North Vietnam. And so Bob tied me up, marched me off. We walked for hours. Every time we go through a village, the women and the kids and all would beat on you and spit on you and throw rocks at you and make life miserable. So I basically spent the first few hours with these, I'd say peasant people, villagers, until an army group came by and picked me up, and then a whole other story begins before I have an escape the next night, and then finally I get to Hanoi. So, but that's another hour's worth of talking.
Okay. And what camps were you held in?
The first place they take most of us was the old French prison, Hoa Lo was the Vietnamese name. It's right downtown Hanoi. It's no longer there, it's been torn down, but it was a French prison, an honest to God true prison. Big walls with barbed wire and glass on the top and concrete, just what you picture as a 18th century French prison. So that's where I started. And then over the course of the 6 years I was there, I was in a place called the Zoo, a place called the Plantation, a place near the Chinese border called Dog Patch. So I guess I was in about 5 or 6 different prisons that they would move you around in their attempt to destroy our organization and our communications network. So about 5 or 6 different prisons before it all ended and I came home.
And you were there, you were shot down in 67?
Yeah, 31 May 67 till 4 March 73.
Okay, the first 3 years, let's just talk about the first 3 years. What were the conditions like in the camps?
I guess the best way I can sum it up, if I could for you, is the North Vietnamese prison philosophy of how to intern people would be total isolation. If they would have had enough single cells or little closets to put every one of us in there and lock us up and never let us see or communicate with any other American up there, that would have been their goal. And if you think about that, if you could accomplish that, now you've cut off people communicating, organizing, and even knowing if the guy next door is there in case they kill him while they're torturing him. But fortunately for us, they didn't have enough little single solitary cells like that, so after being in solitary for about 3 weeks, then I had a roommate, and then over the course of 6 years, I probably had anywhere from 1 or 2 roommates to one time up to 30 or 40 in one room. But so, it's hard to say how were the first 3 years, because the first week or so, they just tortured the hell out of us for military information. And then you just sort of got into a routine where you were just dehumanized, lousy food, poor living conditions, just a miserable existence, and they beat up on the new guys trying to get information. So it was just a horrible experience from start to finish, but the first portion, I'm sure Dave will agree with me, is, I mean, they just beat the hell out of us and tortured us and twisted us and tied us up and used ropes and straps and irons and things that were right out of the dark ages to bring instant pain, to try to make you say more than name, rank, serial number, and date of birth. So it was not a fun experience, put it that way.
And Dave, what camps were you in? Just mostly the first 3 years, and also you were also shot down in 67?
Yes, I was shot down on the 10th of March.
So the first 3 years primarily, what camps were you in?
Well, I started in Heartbreak like everyone else, then went to the zoo, where I was kept in solitary confinement for a year and a half. And then I was put in the backside of the pool hall, where I operated a communications link with another building for the year. And then at the end of our time in the zoo, we went to Camp Faith, which was a good treatment camp, but we didn't get to stay there. The Tay Raid came along.
Well, we'll get to that. What, just in general, you said one of the camps was quote-unquote good treatment camp, but generally, what was the treatment that you received in the camps? Primarily, again, the first 3 years.
Okay, the food was lousy, and the main reason was that the people running in prison were stealing all the food that was sent there for us.
How did you, you're there, you mentioned at lunch the difference between training when you know you've got 5 days of training in surviving torture or something or difficult conditions versus being a real POW and not knowing if there's any end. How did you deal with that? How did you maintain a sense of hope?
Oh, well, that's tough. I had mentioned at lunch that all pilots, Navy and Air Force, go through, and Marine go through some form of survival school, and they attempt to simulate torture of some kind, little black tight boxes and putting you into difficult positions and so forth. But you always knew on Saturday you were going to get on a bus and go have a hamburger and a malt before you got on the airplane to fly to San Diego or wherever you lived. So you always knew that survival school was just a week long and you were going to go home. Now you end up in a situation where you don't even know if you're ever going to go home and if you're going to live. And at the time Dave and I went down, the Code of Conduct read, one of the articles read, I am bound, and I want you to catch the word B-O-U-N-D, I am bound to give nothing but my name, rank, serial number, and date of birth. And I believed in that, and I tried that, and I got the hell kicked out of me, and we used the term, I broke. And then you start lying and trying to subterfuge and give crappy answers because you just can't take the pain anymore. So, but to kind of get back to the question, but you don't know when this is going to end, if ever. I can honestly tell you the first 2 or 3 days when they broke me and I was answering stupid things like, you know, this kind of a bomb or this kind of a target that I was just making it up. When I would go back to that solitary cell at night in heartbreak, I felt like a traitor because I had not gotten stuck with just name, rank, serial number, and date of birth. And I gotta tell you, until I lived with somebody else like Dave or another person who went through this experience and they broke too and basically said, hey Arv, I couldn't stick the name, rank, serial number, and date of birth either. I broke too. So that was a big point. So I guess the way I could summarize this is one time I was in communication with Robbie Reisner, who's one of the really famous MiG ace from Korea, Air Force POWs up there. I'm tapping on the wall with him, and I'll never forget what he tapped through to me. And this was his guidance as the senior officer. He said, Arv, resist, but do not let them make you a cripple. And if you think about it, that sums it up. Just resist the best you can. Don't give them anything for free. Take as much as you can, but when stuff starts popping and breaking and whatever, give some kind of an answer, some kind of a lie to make them back off and stop. I don't know if that really answered your question the way you posed it to me, but that's kind of the existence what we put up with. And let me make something else for sure clear to you. This didn't go on for 6 years, or I wouldn't be sitting here, or I'd be in a rubber cage somewhere. This horrible tortures and beating stuff was the first 2 or 3 weeks. And then later on, if they came after you, like Dave said, for some kind of a write a letter home to your senator that you're against the war, that kind of crap, propaganda stuff, they might tie you up or beat on you a little bit, but nothing was as bad as it was at the very beginning, or otherwise, I don't think any of us would have survived with that kind of constant torture.
Dave, what about for you? How did you maintain a sense of hope as a prisoner?
By communicating as best I could with other cells.
And can you both mentioned communicating, but talk about the specifics of it if you can. How did you do that?
Okay, first we learned the tap code. That's a 25-letter alphabet. They left the K out of the alphabet so they could make it symmetrical. And then the first tap tells you what row the letter is in. The second tap tells you the position in the row. And we went from that to talking through a cup through the wall. You know, if you press this enamel-ware cup we had against the wall and kind of stuff your face in it and talk against pressure, a guy on the other side of a foot-thick brick wall with his ear in exactly the right spot can hear every word you say. So that improved our communication. We also had visual communication. A, B, C, and so on. And there was a two-handed code for longer distances.
Same question, talk about communicating.
Oh, okay. Well, Dave's hit it. This is kind of a humorous story. Nobody taught us that 5x5 code before I was shot down. So when you got there, you had to learn it somehow. So I remember the roommate I had, an Air Force captain, we got moved into another camp, the plantation, and right out behind our back boarded up window, because they didn't want us to see outside, there was a cistern. And about once a week, they'd take one room at a time around there to throw some water on yourself, wash out your shorts, go back to your room, bring out the next room, etc. So I'm walking around the room, and I hear some guys back there showering or throwing water on themselves, and I just keep walking, but all of a sudden, the guard must have been not paying attention that was with them, and I hear a voice come through the window. Hi, this is Lieutenant Commander K. Russell. Take the alphabet, drop the K, put it in 5 columns. Remember, American Football League quits victorious. And that was it. And I remember Ron and I looked at each other, my roommate, and I said, geez, we're both college graduates. I don't know what the hell he's talking about. And so it probably took 3 or 4 days before we finally figured it out. But if you start with a vertical column and have A, B, C, D, E, across the top you'll have AFLQV, American Football League quits victorious. It was just a memory gimmick. So if I want to send you a G, I'm going to go, I just moved you AF and now FG. If I want to send you a Z, 5 over, 5 down. And then for a positive, if I'm listening and I figure out the word, I just go, he goes to the next word. He goes to the next word. If I go 3 times, I want him to repeat. If I go once, I'm saying no. They're always trying to catch us do this. Believe me, this is not a free, let's have fun and tap on the wall. We always have somebody looking under the door for the roving guards. And if guys got caught, they got tortured for communicating. But that was our primary method of communicating, this old tap code, and I think it came from the Civil War or somewhere. One of the Air Force guys remembered it from Boy Scout training or something. But that, and then I could be up here doing it with my hands, or I could be doing it with my eyes, if we all knew it. So it had all kinds of applications. And then Dave mentioned, if we could see from building to building up through a little opening, we'd get guys up there and they got like, you'd swear these guys were deaf mutes as fast as they could go with one hand, sending signals across the yard to the other buildings. And one last sentence, the whole, you haven't asked, well, what the hell were you talking about? And the whole concept was get everybody's name, We all had those names memorized alphabetically. Then if there's anything going on, whoever the senior officer is, we knew who he was in charge of the camp, even though he might be living in another building. So we were organized. It might take days to get some directive from the senior officer, but we had communication. And bottom line, that's how we stay organized. And they knew we were doing it. They'd try to catch us. They'd come in the room, they'd tap on the walls and try to get the other guys to answer. But that was our primary method the whole time we were there. And getting somebody's name, what's going on, what's the latest program they're doing, and then finally you would get down to the newest guy in there. I always ask a group of people I'm asking to, if you've been there 4 years and a new guy shows up, what do you think the first question would be you'd ask him? You have a brand new person that's just gotten shot down, you've been there 4 years, what's the first question you'd want that guy to answer? When you think war end? When you think war end? And nobody knew, but everybody would guess 6 months. We lived on this 6-month Christmas to summer cycle, and I'll stop talking there, but bottom line, communication was, like Dave said, that was our lifeblood, supporting each other and then staying organized, covertly.
Okay, so
I was a 6-monther too. I couldn't make myself believe it would take longer than that to get out of there.
well, it took longer than 6 months.
Yeah.
And after 3 years, the government had organized a raid into a camp called Sante. And Bill Guenon was on that raid, and he flew a C-130. And so can you talk a little bit about the training, the preparation, and then the implementation of the raid?
Can you all hear me in the back row there, the cheap seats? Good. We started the raid in about July of 1970 down Eglin Air Force Base. And we had to put together a mission that includes the C-130. You all know what the C-130 is, 4-engine high wing. They've got a couple out here at the airport, Minneapolis Airport. But we had to then be able to lead 6 helicopters, HH-53s and 1 H-3. We had a total of 56 Green Berets, and if you're into history, that's exactly the same number of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. Look it up. So we got this flying down pretty good, and what was different about the flying, not that we were flying a fixed wing with 6 helicopters in trail, but the fact that we were flying probably 20 knots below our landing speed. And the reason we had to fly it that way, landing speed was about 125. We were flying the rate at 105 knots. And the reason was that H-3 had 14 Green Berets on board with all their equipment gear and then food for the POWs, suits, that sort of thing. And they were full of fuel. His max airspeed was 110. Our stall speed, and that's when the airplane turns into a concrete pool table and falls out of the sky. So the higher math there, 110, 100, we chose 105 knots. And that gave each of us about 5 knots to play with. So we let them in that way, and what we had going for us on that 130, and the reason we used the 130, this was before GPS. And so we didn't have 1, 2, we had 3 navigators. Navigation by committee. And believe it or not, it worked. Everyone had their own role. One was the radar nav, one was just a nav keeping a log and giving us headings, that sort of thing. And the third nav was a map reader. When you think about it, the 2 most important things, must be an airport around here. The 2 most important things on the mission. Number 1, we called it tiptoeing through the SAM tulips that were spread around North Vietnam, because we went in, Son Tay was located about 20 miles due west of Hanoi. And my two pilot friends know what I'm talking about with all the different defenses. We always thought we knew everybody was. The other thing of all where we had to be was flying across the diagonal of that prison camp. And so that's why we had the 3 navs. We also had a what they call a forward-looking infrared radar, and that was like your night eyes, like a cat. And you could see down, it compared cold and warm spots on the ground. So you could hit all your checkpoints very accurately. And of course, the last checkpoint was Son Tay Prison, because what we did, the plan was we'd fly right overhead Son Tay. We would drop 4 bright parachute flares. That's like 1 million candle power. I mean, it was like suddenly daytime, instant. This is 2:30 in the morning, very bright. And then after that, we did a right descending turn after we got in there and came back around, and we dropped firecrackers in boxes, and they started to go off, and they were called firefight simulators. We knew up in that area, it was kind of the head to the AFHS-Mn trail. So we knew there were a lot of troops up there in barracks getting ready to go south, right, where the action was. So we felt if they were up there, they were going to respond where they thought there was a battle going on and not come over to Son Tay. And then the third thing we had, which I think up until that time had never been dropped by a C-130, napalm. We had 2 napalm bombs. They're about 13 feet long. We had jerry rigs to cradle, and they would come out of the back of the 130, parachute. It would go to the vertical, down, break up, pull, and then burn for about 45 minutes. We had also a flight of 5 A-1Es that were up there to give the Green Berets, once they were on the ground support. And so this was a place for them to hold. No one's going to put that fire out for about 45 minutes. So that was the idea. One thing, you know, you asked, what do you remember most about it? And all of us, we just had a gathering here a few weeks ago, the crew of the C-130, and all of us up front remember going down the final run-in heading, and you look out on the horizon, and there are these hazy night lights of Hanoi coming up. We'd never seen that before. So at that point, it became very real. But because, you know, we were flying with a train-following radar, we were down 500 feet and getting down to 200, 250 feet, basically avoiding the radar. And our good friends in the Navy, just about time we're coming up there towards Son Tay, did a diversionary raid over on the East Coast. It was Yankee Station, if you know your history from Vietnam, 3 aircraft carriers. And they put up probably 60, 70 aircraft, 10, 20, 30,000 feet up and down along the coastline there of the Gulf of Tonkin. And that was to get all their defense radars looking out towards the east. And we're crawling in low level from the west. We call it the back door. They never saw us. In fact, we had an EWIL. That's the guy that's like your radar detector in your car. He can tell you what kind of radars are looking at you and where they're located. And having been up there on missions before, you were always having a conversation with your EWIL. Who's looking at us? He was quiet that night, and I thought he'd either fallen asleep or his headset had broken. So I just real quick, I said, EWIL, what are you seeing? He said, nothing. They're all out somewhere else. Nobody's painting us. So that was a good confidence for the crew going in there that it was indeed stealth, surprise, and diversion. At night, it really works well. So we get in there, and both of you gentlemen, I forgot to ask you earlier, had not been in Son Tay? No? Okay. So we got in there, got the Green Berets down on the ground. The one small helicopter, H-3, did an assault landing right in the middle of the compound. We had decided if we tried to land on the outside and then blow a hole in the wall to go in, by the time we did that, if the guards were there, they may start shooting up the prisoners. So we figured, you know, a Friday night, 2:30 in the morning, drop it in right out of the sky, you have instant control of that prison. And that's why we did it that way. The other thing, we probably had, as you call, there's quite a few camps out there. And I don't know why you gentlemen called them camps. They were prisons, right? So that we had about 10 prisons you could pick from. And we decided Son Tay, because there was a branch of the Red River that went like that right around. There was a bridge here and a bridge up here. A1s took one bridge out, Green Berets took the other bridge out. That turned that whole area into an island. So it was immediate control, and we had protection if we had any, response from the enemy trying to get in there. So that's why we chose Sante. Well, this is where the story takes that really twist. Green Berets get on the ground, they start going looking at the cells. The first guy had a megaphone, and he said, we're Americans, we're here to save you, keep your head down, we'll be in your cell in just a little bit. And he released. Hear how quiet it is right in here. That's the way it was there that night. They were expecting to hear applause, cheering, come in and get me, I'm here, let's go home. It was quiet. Right away, he had the sinking heart down to his stomach. This is the raid, you may remember it now, where we got all the way in there, 4 months of training in Florida, got in there, the prison was empty. Remember that one? Now, big question, why was it empty? Some are saying, well, they knew you were coming, and we moved them out. Well, that's not true, because I probably wouldn't be here today. They had that place surrounded with AAA. What really happened when I talked to John Reynolds, I'm sure you gentlemen know John Reynolds, he was at Sante, and he said the well that was supplying the prison had dried up. And so we started our training in July, the raid was in November. They had moved the prisoners out of Sante the 14th of July because of that well drying up, not because anyone knew. The thing that's bugged my mind since then, here's the Vietnamese, they know that prison is empty. So now in their own little mind, they're trying to figure out why would the Americans raid an empty prison? And they finally figured it out, one of their brilliant senior leaders, he said, that was just a practice. They're coming back. So that, we think, was part of the reasons why they took you guys back down into Hanoi. They really realized, I think for a while, they didn't really believe that the PWs had been forgotten by the US. And so you guys were getting that kind of line of propaganda, right? They've forgotten about you, you're bad, all that sort of thing. So once that happened, they knew this is a real thing. And so they moved them in there, got them together. And as I understand, the food improved, treatment was better, and you guys finally came home in '73.
So, Dave, how did you find out about the Sante raid? And after you were a prisoner for 3 years by now, you didn't know how much longer you're going to be a prisoner. How or did things change for you? So did you find out about the raid? And B, how or did things change for you in the camp?
Well, I was one of about 200 at Camp Raid, and we were close enough that we could see the missiles being launched and we could hear the guns. And then 24 hours later, they loaded us all on trucks and hauled us back down to Wallow Prison.
And the Wallow prison was where?
In downtown Hanoi.
Mm-hmm. And the conditions there?
Well, they put us in large groups in those big cells, roughly 50 men per cell. And we had good communication all the time. Food was quite a bit better than it had been in the past, but it still was lousy.
And it must have been quite an experience for you to all of a sudden be with 50 other Americans.
Yes, it was. Later they gave us playing cards, chess sets from Russia, and we basically spent the next 3 years just playing games and wishing we were out of there.
And Arn, how about for you?
Yeah, I think the biggest effect of the Sante raid was that when they did move us into those big rooms, now, one of the things when you got a new roommate, if you were lucky enough to get one, to spend a boring day locked in a room would be, please tell me your biography. I'm willing to listen to anything you want to talk to me about, from your grandpa, grandma, aunts, uncles. Just talk. And so now you've got perhaps 50 new faces that you had their names memorized alphabetically, and now here they are, and we've got 50 new biographies. I don't care what you majored in college, you were going to talk about that or teach a course. We had French, Spanish, Russian, German lessons going on in the evenings from the guys who knew that. One of our favorite pastimes was telling movies. You know how hard up you are for entertainment when you will sit and listen to a movie being told for the second time. And I did that many a time. One of our guys, just as an example, had read all the Horatio Hornblower stories, and he had a gifted memory, and he could sit and start from Midshipman Hornblower, and you'd swear he was turning the pages telling you the story. And then every night he would manage to end it as if it was the perils of Pauline, and Horatio was in some horrendous problem, and you'd have to wait till the next night to go on with the story. So bottom line, the move got us together, and like Dave said, it made communications easier. I don't remember the food getting a heck of a lot better, and I will give those people credit. I don't care how much we bombed the hell out of them any given day, they managed to get us 2 meals. Now, you wouldn't even eat it unless you were as hungry as we were. It was usually just a watery soup with whatever grassy looking vegetable that they threw in there. Maybe a little bit of rice on the side that was full of rocks and weevils and stuff that we just considered protein. And once in a while, a little piece of bread that was so gooey in the middle that later on they gave us enough bread, we used to scoop that stuff out and make ashtrays and dice and cigarette trays. And bottom line, the food stunk, but we survived on it. So I guess that's the main thing. And the other one too was the fact that the Sante Raiders, that did reinforce that, hey, they haven't forgotten us. I know there were down times when sometimes you'd think the only person that knows I'm up here is some guy keeping a file cabinet with my file in it back in Washington, D.C. And then you get out of that mood and get your hopes back up again. So it was very cyclical on how you went from day to day. But the raid did great things for us, even though you guys left and you felt like you hadn't accomplished your mission. You sure as hell did, as far as I was concerned.
Now,
just a footnote to this. People were saying, well, maybe your intelligence was bad because you didn't know the prison was empty. You can only do so much, and like they used to say, at that time we didn't have a camera that could take a picture through a roof to know if anybody's home. And the other thing is, just before we left on the raid, we came out of Thailand, up through Laos and then into North Vietnam. We had the current names of who was being held at Sante. And the reason we had that, you guys had a Navy seaman named Doug Hegdong, and he had a photogenic mind, and he memorized like 300 names. Yeah. And so the Vietnamese were still worried then about world opinion, and so they would release prisoners every now and then just to say, we're good people. And you guys made sure Doug was released early, and so he had this mind. It's like you're saying the alphabet very fast. They couldn't ask questions. They put him in a room, tape recorder, and he just ran through the whole list. 300 names, rank, they didn't shoot down, I think, the aircraft they were flying and where they were. Do that for 300 times. He did that.
I'd like to add something to that, because sometimes I get asked to speak on this subject, and when I tell people, yeah, I had 300 names alphabetically memorized, I see people's eyes kind of glaze over like, are you kidding me? I have to tell you, if you take a person and lock them in a room and you don't even have a wristwatch to know what time it is, your brain becomes so hungry for anything that will exercise it that slowly, and this was slowly, the names would trickle in as new guys would be shot down, but it is no problem at all to slowly accumulate 300 or 400 names and alphabetically have them in your mind, and you go over them every day when you're either walking around the room or putting yourself to sleep at night. So, and memorizing poetry, if anybody in the room knew poetry, it was just anything to exercise the brain. If you were to ask me now to give you the names of the first 5 guys on the list, I can give you 2. And that's only because their name's the same. Will Abbott and Bob Abbott. I'm now a senior citizen, I can't remember anymore.
There was another reason for remembering all the names too. During Korea, they didn't get asked for the prisoners by name, and some of them never came back. So we wanted everybody's name to be out, so that our State Department could at least yell at them.
Briefly, we've got about 2 minutes left here. For each of you, you had 6 years roughly in North Vietnam. So in the 6th year, you were released. And can you talk briefly about what happened in that process? Did you get some forewarning about it?
Yeah.
And then what was the process?
Well, the peace accords, we found out, were signed on the 27th of January. And our senior officers had put out the word. Our goal was never give them any propaganda if we can avoid it. So bottom line, the word came around the big camp there where we had 40 and 50 men in the room. They theorized one day they're going to call us outside, we're going to be standing out there in ranks, and somebody's going to tell us you're going home. Please get out there and don't show any emotion, don't clap, don't be happy, don't let them get a damn video of us jumping up and down screaming because we're going home. So that was our guidance. Sure enough, I don't know how long it was after 27 January, that day came for me where I was, and we went outside, we were all lined up, the Vietnamese camp commander and then a guy that could speak English came out there and basically read off how peace accords had been signed. We're going home in 4 groups based on 4 different dates, based on shoot down date, earliest first and so forth. Any sick and wounded will go home right off the top at the beginning. I think they were really disappointed because we all just stood there like bumps on a log. Didn't react at all. Went back in the rooms and all hell broke loose. I mean, screaming and hollering and having a good time out of range of their cameras. So bottom line, that's how we found out. Then, but they never told us the dates. No first group this date, second group this date. So we start watching for signs. The next thing they did is they organized us in these big rooms by shoot down dates. Tell me if I'm going too long. So now we got rooms with 40 and 50 guys that start with Ev Alvarez, the longest guy there, you know, broken down by how you were shot down by dates. So we think, okay, that's a good sign. Then X amount of weeks later, let's say, or days later, that room that has the earliest shoot downs, they take them over and they fit them for clothes that look decent. We wanted to come home in the pajamas and the automobile tire sandals that we've been wearing for 6 years. But no, they put us in a pair of pants that looked like Dockers and a shirt, a little jacket, and they even gave us a little ditty bag that had soap and a towel, like we'd all been on vacation, you know, and shoes, real shoes. But guess what? They only fitted us for that stuff, and then they kept it in that room and put everybody back in the room. So that was a sign. We used to think about food as a big indicator that things were going to change. So we said, well, if these guys ever get a BFD, and that can mean anything, a big fine dinner in this case, sure enough, they'd be going home the next day. Well, one day we see them killing some chickens out in the yard. The guys in that room tapping on the wall. Tonight we all had a little piece of chicken. They're going home tomorrow. Next morning, we're all up, and now we can look outside. They don't have everything sealed up. We see them bring the guys out, they have them shave, they march them over, they put on their clothes, and they leave. And that was the first group. I was in the second group, no date. So bottom line, I can't go on for 4 groups, but so none of the groups knew any dates. You were still in prison until that sequence happened. Go over, get fitted for your clothes. One morning, shave, put your clothes on, go out and get on the bus, drive out to Callahan Airport, get on that beautiful airplane and fly to the Philippines and come home. So that's kind of how it went down as far as getting us to the Philippines. And then that's another story from there on home from there.
Just quickly, Dave, what was your experience?
It was pretty much the same. They took half the prisoners out to read them the agreement. And of course we had a guy standing outside the crowd giving us the terminology in hand code. So then they put the first group back inside, took the second group out, we just walked around and ignored them. Because we already had it. And the same, well, Arv and I went out on the same day. And we maintained strict discipline until the wheels left the runway.
Then we all started
And it
hollering.
was all yelling. And another one when we got feet wet.
I tell you, I have to, if you saw any of the pictures, we got on those big, what were they, C-141s?
Yeah.
And so we're all facing aft, rows of us sitting there. And the press was on the airplane. And like I say, I'm in the second group. So the press has seen the reaction of the first group, but we don't know anything about it. So as we're taxiing out, it's funny, it was just a spontaneous, just total silence. It's like we couldn't really believe that we're gonna go. So everybody was just totally silent, and I happened to just be in the very front row, facing the back of the airplane, and I see all these newsreel guys back there, their cameras and stuff, and I'm just thinking, why in the hell aren't they in their seats? You know, and we taxi out, line up on the runway, and as soon as that guy, he puts up the power, I mean, all hell broke loose. We just started screaming, waving our arms. These guys knew that was going to happen because they'd seen the first group do it. So they're capturing pictures and taking newsreels, and it was totally just spontaneous. And then, like Dave said, we're still flying over land and we're all thinking, oh my God, they could still shoot us down. And so once we went what we call feet wet out over the water heading for the Philippines, another big cheer because now we know we're on the way. And I gotta say one last thing. I will not mention any names of Hollywood people, but there are some Hollywood people who claimed that that was all staged. Totally staged by our government and with us going along with the program. And I'm here to tell you, that's pure BS. It was just us being so damn happy that we were on the way home. That it was for real.
Welcome home.
For those of you that can read, I've got a book over here on the Doolittle table. It's Secret and Dangers, and it describes our whole mission, how we flew in, how we came out. We had a lot of glitches to deal with that night. So it's interesting, moving. Thank you.